What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy GS Luke here with our round 2 live stream for the RBC Heritage. Going to get you ready for all your showdown lineups with a look at the weather report, some shots gained out there from today, as well as some strategy, contest selection, and lineup construction out there for tomorrow's action to get you ready for all of your exposure. So any questions, anything that we need to fill in the gaps out there, feel free to go ahead and fire away down there in chat. See, we already got a bunch of you down there ahead of time. So some early achievers, some overachievers down there, and go collect. We got Alan down there, Michael C. Floyd also Wayne and kept down there too. And yeah, as Ross said, JT confirmed not bad. And hey, any questions you guys have, feel free to go ahead and let me know. And D Pepe down there says almost took down the $33 GPP today. Well, the next best thing would be to go out there and take it down tomorrow. So let's get after it, man. Anything that you have for me, go ahead and let me know. But we're going to start it off with a look at the averages from today, as well as a look at weather for tomorrow. So in terms of the averages from today, we didn't have like waves or anything like that. But if you split it by the first versus second half of tee times, you can't ignore a two-stroke difference. In fact, it was actually an exactly 2.3 stroke difference there, which was all due to the wind. The first half of tee times had no wind for almost all their rounds. Maybe their last like 2-3 holes, you had the wind kick up for some of your earliest starters. But it was a massive advantage. And it wasn't like it was a ton of wind that came through. In fact, if you take a look at the observed weather in the afternoon, it was only about 7, maybe 10 miles an hour at times there in the PM wave, but it was literally 0 miles an hour in the morning. So for tomorrow, where it's going to get gradually stronger as the day goes on, as we'll see in some of the forecast here, it also gets a little bit gustier as the day goes on. You're not going to see a two-stroke advantage because it went from literally nothing today there to about 7 to 10 miles an hour. But something like a half a stroke difference, maybe give or take 0.2 strokes in either direction, is kind of what I would expect out there for round 2. So I don't think it's anything that you have to go all in on. In fact, I've already done my projections and player pool out there for round 2, and I am shading towards the early guys, especially for like my 6 and 7K players. But there are a few 8 and 9K guys that have really good ball striking stats, maybe even due for a little bit of short game regression, that are towards the very end of tee times that I did sneak into my 150 max pool. Now, in some of my like single entries, some of my smaller field GPP lineups where I want to be a little bit more correlated out there with the weather, I might be avoiding some of those players in those kind of scenarios. But especially when I'm going to have 50 lineups out there in the big $5 tomorrow, we'll have to see what we have for the contest selection here in a little bit. But if I'm entering in that big $5 for tomorrow, I've got to have some of those outside players to go out there and plug into lineups. So the weather today definitely had an impact. And when we take a look at this forecast over there for tomorrow, you'll see that around in the morning, it's about 9, maybe 10 miles an hour sustained winds. Whereas in the afternoon, it's blowing closer to 13 to 14 miles an hour and pretty consistently at that sort of number. And the wind gusts, they don't get drastically worse throughout the day. They do start at about 15 miles an hour. But by the time they peak out in the afternoon, it's close to 20, if not a little bit over 20 miles an hour of wind gusts. So, that's a solid 5 to 7 mile an hour difference compared to what you have earlier in the day, which I know doesn't sound like much, but when you had a 2-stroke difference, 2.3 stroke difference out there for round number 1, any sort of advantage is probably going to be at least about a half a stroke, if not, like half a stroke out there in either direction. So in the positive, right? I think it might even be like a stroke difference out there between the two different waves. So that's why I'd be siding towards those players further down the board. But just because you have a 1-stroke difference, right, doesn't mean you can go out there and you're not going to have a good round. In fact, if you take a look at the players from today, sure, a lot of them were on that side of the draw, or at least that first versus that second half. But guys like Wyndham Clark were from that bad side. In fact, one of the last few players that was on the course. Also, Brian Harmon there at -5. And you had your guys like Rose, Gerard, Steven Yeager, Max Grazerman also get the job done. So if you have a few of those guys leaking into your lineups, don't feel like it's a really terrible thing. It's just that those players that you're using, you probably don't want to have as chalk, right? You don't want to be playing somebody from that PM wave unless maybe it's a Scotty Scheffler. Maybe that's the one exception to the rule that you go out there and use. You don't want them to be a guy that you're using in like half your lineups. Now, the Scotty Scheffler is clearly the best player in the field. He's also proven himself to be a pretty good wind player over the years as well. So maybe that's why you could argue to make an exception there. You could do it with a few other players out there as well, but only do it on guys that you want to get leverage on and that you're comfortable using in those sort of lineups. So for example, like a 10K piece of chalk that's like 25% owned, not named Scotty Scheffler, it's going to be really tough for me to want to play those guys towards the latter half. So that's why I structured my strategy out there from the weather angle, and I'll be keeping an eye on this, right? I'm not going to be just concrete in my lineup lineups as of right now. It's 7 p.m. on a Thursday night, so a lot of things could change by the time we get to lock over there on Friday morning. But as of this current HRRR forecast, I think that is the best thing to go out there and do with strategy. So if we take a look at the tee times for tomorrow, these would be your first few players off. They're starting at 8 a.m. local time, so they're going to be going off there relatively early. You've got guys like Phillips, Ricky Fowler going out there first, English, Jacob Bridgman, Rogers, Hisatune, this Hughes Gerard group, or even Dietrich Dunlop in that first 4 or 5 groups off of hole number 1, all going to be a pretty sizable advantage, I'd say, out there to the rest of the field. And it's not black and white, right? Somebody's probably going to ask me, I haven't even looked at the chat quite yet, guys, on a cutoff time, right? I'm sure there's probably even a question down there. Excuse me there. Let me get a sip of water. But I'm assuming there's maybe even a question already down there in the chat about a cutoff line. There's not really a cutoff line here, right? As you get further down these tee times, I think conditions are going to progressively get a little bit worse. So, for example, if you have 2 players you're trying to choose between, one of them goes off in this pod that's in this first 4 or 5 groups, and then the next one's in this next 4 or 5 groups. If it truly is even across the board, then take the one that's on the earliest pod, right? And, if you're comparing the first pod to the last pod of tee times, well, then it's a bigger difference than if you're just comparing the first to that second pod of 5 tee times. So that's how I look at that sort of weather edge, and that's how I'm looking at tomorrow's slate as of right now. And just stay on top of it. That's always the one PSA I give when looking at these weather forecasts, is that they can change rather wildly. And on top of that, they're not always the most accurate. So I'm never really going all in on one of these edges, but I do think it's a good tool for going out there and breaking ties. And if you're trying to add a few guys into your player pool, and especially if you're a 150 max player, or even entering like 50 to 100 lineups out there into a contest, if you're trying to round out your pool with some 6, 7K guys, like look for the early tee times. Like you're going to have a hard time choosing between some of those 6K guys sometimes. Like maybe you have like 5, 6 you want to go out there and play. If you're trying to narrow it down to 2 or 3, just see if any of them are going off early, and then make sure that those guys are out there in your player pool. So that's more so how I use this to my advantage, and not like full on stacking all 6 guys early. Because if you look at these tee times over here, I know we didn't mention this, it's not a lot of studs, right? It's a lot of 6K guys that are going off here really early. You get your first stud, and I'll put that in quotes there, with a Wyndham Clark at 850. Not really a 10K guy that you're going out there and jamming into lineups, but like your day goes off at 9, 10. And yeah, I guess Aubert, Xander, those are like definitely your true first studs there at about 10 o'clock a.m. So the first 2 hours of tee times, right, are guys that are maybe Wyndham Clark at the very best, mostly 6, 7K range guys down there. That's why going all in on a weather edge might be a little bit silly. Now, in the big $5 or $20 GPP, maybe not silly, because you could have 4 or 5 guys out there from the morning go out there and be the absolute nuts. But like in single entries, contests where you don't have to have the nuts to go out there and take it down, it's probably getting a little bit too cute going out there and stacking it fully on. But, if you can find some studs out there, if you can make it work with the salary to spend up and take all the guys going before 10 a.m., I'm not completely against that either. I just think that the best place to go out there and do so would probably be in some of those large field GPPs. What we're going to go through next on here is going to be the shots gained metrics out here from round number 1. And this is where we can go through any player deep dives that you have. So before I go through any specific questions that you guys may have threw down there in the chat, go ahead and let me know any player deep dives that you guys want to go through. But we're going to go through the stats in general over here from today. And what we usually start with is the ball striking stats. That's our go-to over here for any given round. And the reasoning for that is that's the most consistent categories out there from day to day. Ball striking just combines off the tee plus approach, and how a player is hitting the ball, that's how they're driving it and hitting their irons, is by far the most consistent portion of golf out there from event to event, day to day, you name it out there. Regardless of sample size, that's the sort of thing that players can sustain for months at a time, or even a season at a time, like you had for Scottie Scheffler last year. Scotty's putter was variant out there from event to event, but he had his putter he went out there and won last year, and he also had a lot of events where he bled strokes out there on the greens where he was probably finishing closer to 25th, 30th, or something like that, which for a lot of players would be really acceptable, but that's below Scottie Scheffler standards. That's why if we can find guys that were gaining out here from the ball striking today, and that maybe just weren't putting over their heads or weren't chipping over their heads today, those are the kind of guys that I'm actively looking to play. Now, an example of a guy that did chip and putt over his head would be a Justin Thomas here. So sure, hit the ball beautifully out there today, but because he was so short game dependent, his round looked a lot better than how he hit the ball. Now, part of golf is how you score around and on the greens. Like, it's not like we can completely ignore that. But as I was saying, this is the more variant side of golf, whereas your ball striking is what we can actually rely on. So when we come back to our round 3 live stream tomorrow and we double check on these shots gained metrics, I'm expecting Justin Thomas to probably gain less than 3.5 strokes to the field between these two categories. And I would even venture to say that there's a chance that he loses strokes out there in those two categories. So that's why we're looking at these stats, and more importantly, trying to find guys that maybe didn't putt and chip over their head. So for example, like a Scotty Scheffler, he was mostly approach play today. Like, that is a massive green flag in terms of a shots gained profile. You also have guys like Jordan Spieth up here that gained in the 2 ball striking categories, but actually lost in the 2 short game categories. So those sort of players are the ones that kind of jump off the board to me. Unfortunately, those 3 are later tee times. So if you're looking for that sort of angle, you're not really going to get it with those top 3. But I will tell you right now that I am playing one of those top 3 players because of how they grade out with the shots gained metrics. And if you've been a long time follower of my content, you already know who that player is. But there are going to be exceptions to the weather rule that I go out there and use. And, a beautiful set of shots gained metrics is a really good reason for me to break that kind of rule. Ryan Gerard here, he gained over 2.5 strokes on approach. And also, you can see the short game wasn't really carrying him there. But unlike these other top 3 players, Ryan Gerard does have an early tee time. So he's going off at 8:30. He's the 4th group off. You may have conned that one a little bit earlier. That sort of play is going to get some extra ownership. So I'm playing Ryan Gerard in my exposure, knowing that he's going to have some attention behind him. But if you guys are going to use Ryan Gerard in your lineups, right, you look at the tee times, you look at the stats, he checks a lot of the boxes that you're looking for. Just know that in my projections, which these are separate than the SHIPIT Nation slate, so I always like to put that asterisk out there because I can't speak and I don't represent SHIPIT Nation when I say this in particular, but I've got him well over 10% ownership for tomorrow. Like, compared to the guys around him, let me double check his price tag here. I believe he's like bottom end of the 7K range now. Let me double check with a control F over here on my sheet. So yeah, he's bottom end of the 7K range, right? So we got a big price increase ever since main slate. I've got him double, even quadruple the ownership of some of the other guys around him. So if you're going to use that sort of play, just know that you're not the only one that is going to be looking at these shots gained metrics and trying to find sleeper plays. And especially for some of those first 3 groups off, weather has become something that a lot of showdown players go out there and use. Not all of them. In fact, it's still a small minority of players that will go out there and really fully lean into any sort of a weather edge. But what I do know is that any casual players that choose to play the quote unquote weather will just like blindly stack the morning for showdown. That is kind of like a well-known edge out there, that if you stack the mornings more often than not, that you're probably going to get some sort of an edge more often than not. But that's not something that you can live by every single slate. So, right, that's why we're looking at these weather reports, trying to figure it out for any given day out there on tour. But guys like Gerard, that also the approach stats, right, gaining over 2.5 strokes in that category, that is not going to go completely overlooked by the community. So I know even using him in lineups that he's getting that kind of steam. Just don't get caught off guard by those sort of players. Brian Campbell's also going off late, but his ball striking was excellent, gaining over 3 strokes over there with his approach play. Akshay Bhatia also a little bit of a later starter, but gaining nearly 4 strokes over there on approach. Now I would like him to clean up the off the tee a little bit. He did lose a little bit over a stroke there in that category, but these are the sort of guys I'm looking at. And, there are a few other guys here that I am breaking that role for. So, Keegan there, I'll include in this, Patrick Cantlay down there at T10. Of the guys that I just talked about that have really good shots gained metrics but are going off later, there are like 2 guys on that next group that we just went through there that I am using out there in lineups that I'm breaking that rule for, just because a lot of those players are the ones that popped with the stats. Now, part of the reason for that is that they were playing an easier golf course. So that's something that you have to think about as well, right? The reason why these guys had a better chance to go out there and gain with their ball striking is that they were playing a golf course without wind. So when we go a little bit further down here is where you start to find more guys that are towards that PM wave. So a Wyndham Clark, for example, he was PM wave. Now, he also did go out there and gain 2.5 strokes putting. He is a world-class putter, so maybe he can keep that going out there for a few days. But his shots gained profile is pretty decent, and he's going out there in the morning. So I'd expect guys like Wyndham Clark to also pick up quite a bit of steam. But if you're trying to find players from that side of the draw, let me think off the top of my head. I know Brian Harmon was another one of those players. I believe Pavon is an early-ish tee time, but don't quote me on that. I might be wrong on that one. Grazerman, Finau, I also think are towards the middle to like early part of tee times. There are players, if you go just a little bit further down the board, you got to kind of dumpster dive here a little bit, where you can find them close to like maybe like 1.5 shots gained ball striking that fit that AM wave narrative. So that is kind of the hard part when you're playing this sort of weather edge, especially when today it was like 2 strokes negative towards that side, is that the shots gained metrics aren't going to look as good on those sort of players. The other thing I like to look at here would be your short game stats. So guys that gained a whole bunch, as we've already mentioned, maybe you're going to come back down to earth a little bit. So a Henley gaining 3 strokes putting, not something that he's likely to do for all 4 rounds. Now, he is a good putter, so could he do it for 2, maybe even 3 of the 4 days? Yes, that's why he's a world-class putter, but I would not expect that to be his case for all 4 rounds. So if he's going to be chalky, like he is going to be there at -7, he's not going to be the kind of guy that I'm using in showdown lineups. A Poston gaining 3 strokes putting, a JT, Justin Thomas, both the JTs up here towards the top end of the board. I don't know if I can really count on that from either of those 2 players, but even guys like a Wyndham Clark, a Matt Kuchar, Sibu Kim here at 2 strokes putting, unless you really like the play for some other reason, and it could be course history, it could be that they're high birdie percentage player, like just like some of the other stuff that we've talked about, there are going to be exceptions to the rule, and some of it is just projection. Like some of these guys, like there's a guy that I just mentioned there that just projects way too good for the price tag, and he's got good course history, so I'm going to him at this sort of spot in round 2 showdown. But in general, like these guys that gained a whole bunch putting, unless they're super low owned for some reason, they're probably not making their way into my lineups. And it's not even just the putting, but it's also this around the green here. So you can take a look at the top end of the board over there on the right. Like a Harmon, I know he's going to be an AM wave player. It's kind of a tough scene to see him gaining all the strokes around the green. Now, the ball striking kind of makes up for it, so you've got to weigh that out there in your process. But an Aubert got really lucky around the green, but he is one of the earlier guys going off. Just to remind you, his tee time was about like 10:15. So, like, if you're trying to find some studs, you might have to overlook some of this over there with guys like Aubert. And, you know, just for full transparency with what I'm doing, like I'm using Aubert out there in lineups. He's not that chalky towards the top end of the board. Again, this is referencing my projections, which are posted on my Patreon page, not what you have on SHIPIT Nation. I've got him at sub 15% ownership over there in GPPs. So you're giving me like one of the earliest tee times of those early players. Projection is a hair lower than Morikawa, who's $200 more expensive, but I've got Morikawa a little bit higher owned. And if you take a look at the shots gained metrics, like they're almost identical in both players. Like neither one really stands out. But part of that is because they played a golf course that was 2 strokes harder, 2.3 strokes harder, in fact, than what you had there in the first half of tee time. So that's what I'm looking at with these shots gained metrics. By the way, the opposite is true with a lot of these categories, right? Really bad ball striking stats, right? That's going to take away from players and how I'm projecting them. And then over here with the 2 short game categories, it's not like having a bad short game is a good thing. It's just that if you had some ball striking stats going for you and you didn't have the best short game day, then those are the kind of players that I could be looking for. So just looking towards the bottom end of this list, like a Benny Ann, he wasn't really that bad from tee to green. Now, he wasn't great, right? He still lost like a stroke out there from tee to green, but the reason why he shot +3 was the putter, him losing nearly 3.5 strokes in that category. But like a Daniel Berger is a great example of one of these short game regression players, where from tee to green, he gained in all 3 categories. In fact, close to 2 strokes out there with the ball striking, and then lost almost 3 strokes putting. Like that's a bounce back candidate, kind of like perfect one right there. But like a Highsmith here losing nearly 5 strokes approach, this is just only an or he could kind of play. This is a GPP only sort of player that you'd be looking at. Not to say that he can't go out there and bounce back, especially in a no-cut event like this, right? Like these kind of guys have to grind over the 4 rounds. So it's not quite the same as being +6 last place after the first round, or second to last place. I guess Dunlop is the unfortunate one who's out there in last place. But these sort of guys, you're not really using the stats to go out there and play them, right? It's all ownership if you're playing a Joe Highsmith. Whereas a Tony Finau here, you can see gained off the tee and was a little bit into the negative there with his approach play, but it was all the short game that really held him back there. And in the case of a Tony Finau, to show you guys the tee time, I think he was 9-10 over there. So he's not one of the first few groups out, but at least I believe he's like 7th or 8th in terms of groups out. it's decent enough for me to go out there and make him a showdown play. So those are the kind of things I'm looking at. You can look at around the green, say the same exact thing, but I want to go down the chat now, see what you guys have for some deep dives before we go through the contest selection out there for Friday, as well as building a lineup together to give you a little bit of an idea of the thought process. So where did we leave off? A lot of comments. So I knew we'd have a lot here, but I'm going to get to all the specific questions. Should we be worried about Michael Kim? So I don't know if I'd say we because I didn't play him, but I believe he's like even par or something, right? So I don't know if I'd be that worried about him at this point. Yeah, and it's a no-cut event. You've got 3 more rounds to go low. Somebody even par I wouldn't be worried about at all. Like I've got a few guys at -2 that are studs that I'm kind of worried about. Like a Morikawa at -2. It's kind of like the same thing as a Michael Kim at even par. He's just got to make sure that that -2 round, in the case of the studs, is probably the worst round that you're going to have all week. And in the case of a 6-7K range guy, like you have with Michael Kim, your worst round is probably going to have to be even par. So he's got to go after and get after it the next 3 days. But yeah, you're not dead with him, man. It's like the first quarter of a showdown slate, right? You're only through 25%. You never want to be sweating it too much after just one quarter. What's up, fellow Pittsburgh fan? What's going on, Jim22? Yeah, I'm a big Steeler fan, big Pirates fan as well. So glad to have you down there in chat. What is wrong with Sahith? So I can only tell you what the shots gain metrics will say on Sahith. Did blow up quite a bit on his front 9 today. It was a bit of everything. He was negative in all 4 categories, but the 2 glaring categories were approach play and the putting. The putting you'd expect to turn around. He's a world-class putter. The approach play, though, has been a sore spot for him at times here in 2025. So Sahith, I will say, is one of the more volatile players that we have. Somebody that will shoot well over par one day and then shoot well under par the next. And I think the best situation to kind of take a shot on Sahith at low ownership is in this sort of spot here where no one's really going to get to him. You know, he's going to go way under the radar with the ownership. In fact, just to give you guys a little frame of reference when it comes to the ownership, I'll give you guys a ballpark idea from my projections. So I've got him at sub 7%. I'll say over there in my projections. So if you're going to use him, he's kind of like the Ori could with a Benny Yan. There's other guys that are like +6, +7, that sort of thing. You only use them in those large field GPPs to get different, but they always have that bounce back performance in them. And I'll say especially guys like Sahith. And I'm not using him in my lineups, so I do like to give that transparency where I can, but I do think that he is in play for sure. Can I deep dive Corey Connors? I absolutely can. I've got to say, I was kind of surprised how he started today. I thought he was going to play a lot better here this week. Even if I didn't have a whole bunch of exposure, especially with the form, I thought he'd be at least like in the top 25 after today. But -1 truly felt about as terrible as this round could have gone because the ball striking was there all day. You can see into the positive in those 2 categories. Now he's usually gaining a lot more than 0.15 or 0.33 strokes gained on approach like you saw for today. But the short game, as you can see, he lost over a stroke between those 2 categories. This is a bounce back candidate kind of waiting to happen. Now it's not one on steroids, right? Where he was gaining like 3 strokes approach and then losing like 3 strokes short game. But it's a decent one, right? Where you're leaning in both directions there. So I like that quite a bit. It's helping us out with the short game regression and with some of the ball striking there. Yeah, Dunlop lost over 6 strokes off the tee and then on approach. Yeah, man, he's in some sort of funk. Hopefully he'll figure it out soon, but it's not going great for him. A little JT first round leader bet. There you go, Rob. I'm on the outright train myself, so we'll have to see what happens over the next 54 holes. You have 48% Harmon. Wow, that's crazy. And you need Harrison Rye to pop off. Best of luck to you. We got Brian down there in chat. Cam Young wasn't a dumpster fire. What do I say from round 2? He's got really good course history, so that's what I know about Cam Young. That's another reason to maybe consider him out there in your lineups. Short game today was what held him up, though. So I don't think he's the best play on paper, but there are always going to be guys that you kind of like break the roll for. And I kind of hinted at it with this course history stuff. Cam Young, if he figures out the ball striking, normally that's been the strength of his game here for the last 6 to 12 months, and then does the short game thing again where he gains 3 strokes or a little bit over 2.5 strokes in that category, then he could really be in business. But it's more so the course history and the familiarity that I like here. Let's see. Yeah, we can see you, Rob. We can see you down there in chat. What's going on, gang? Says, hey, Luke, can I deep dive Homa? I absolutely can. So Max Homa started off pretty well, but really fell off towards the middle. We had a lot of birdies today at the very least. But stat-wise, lost with the putter, gained on approach. It's a good stat profile. The off the tee play could have been a little bit better. Max Homa is the kind of guy who's just got to clean it up with the off the tee play. He put himself behind the 8 ball, hole number 3. I know hole number 5, it was the same. And I believe at 8, it was that same kind of thing. But his back 9, sorry, I had it backwards. I thought that he started good and then kind of fell off. His back 9 was where he ended up showing that momentum. So I like that heading into today, and the stats are favorable, I'd say, for him, which we have not said for him in a very, very long time. Can I deep dive on Aubert and Morikawa? So yeah, both of them kind of just shaky today with the shots gained metrics. Aubert lost on approach and then gained with the around the green play. We showed that one a little bit earlier, so just the Spark Notes version there. Morikawa was a little bit better stat-wise. He gained to the 2 ball striking categories and lost with the 2 short game categories. So if you're trying to like choose between the two, the stats would lean towards Morikawa, but that is where the ownership's leaning to. I've got Morikawa about 2-3% higher owned than what you have there with Aubert. The other one is the chalk towards the top. That's a Scotty Scheffler for sure at -7. I've got Justin Thomas also getting quite a bit of ownership after his -10 round. But between the two, yes, stats lean towards that, but also with the ownership. Let's see. What's going on, Jonathan? What are my thoughts on what golfers I never get right? For you, it's got to be Pendrith and Siwoo. It's a good question. I seem to never get Cantlay right, but I got him right today for a prop. So I was sweating buckets, though. It took until hole 16 for him to make his last birdie. He's one, and I guess Corey Connors, too. He's one that I never seemingly get right. But I kind of forgive and forget on that, because then I always get them right. Like Cantlay, like today, I've played Cantlay a few times recently where he's had top 15 finishes. So like, I don't even know if that's necessarily true anymore. And then same thing with Coco. Like I've taken advantage of him a few times here in 2025. So yeah, I guess those two. But yeah, if it's Siwoo and Pendrith for you, I feel like everyone's got somebody they can say that about. Do I think it was wind or the course drying out? I think it was a little bit of both, Brian, but mostly the wind, especially because it went from 0 to like 7 to 10 right away. Morikawa's putting has been terrible, unfortunately. I agree with that. If the PM played so much harder, does it make sense to compare ball striking stats for the PM to the AM guys? I mean, we already mentioned that, Travis, right? It's not something you can compare apples to apples, which is why you go a little bit further down the board. So we already talked about that. If you have other questions about that, we can go through it. But you have to take that into consideration, right? That's why guys like Wyndham Clark, even though he had that really good round, is further down the ball striking board because of that effect. And like we were saying there with Brian's question, it wasn't even just the wind, it was also the firmness of the green. So yeah, I completely accounted for that. And it's hard to do it, but you have to consider that, especially with the extremes. Like the very first guys off likely had a bigger advantage than the guys that were towards the middle and then quote unquote AM because they were just towards the first half, right? Whereas like the last guys off on tee times probably got screwed a lot more than the guys that were like the first group into the quote unquote PM wave because of how they have all that set up. You've got to consider that aspect as well, right? You can't even just do it half versus half. You've got to look at it, like I was saying before with the weather aspect, very much like on a scale. Like it can't just be granular, cutoff line, that sort of thing. You've got to look at it as like, okay, it's this specific tee time out of this wide range of them. Thagala Nuke round tomorrow, worst guy that you've got. Best of luck, Brian. I actually think he's got a chance for it, man, because it's this no-cut event, and he's kind of known for that. So, hey, I don't think you're dead, that's for sure. Sam Stevens on the deep dive. Okay, let's look at it. So good old Sam Stevens is a high birdie percentage player, also a good par 5 scorer. So he's a player that I keep my eye on quite a bit over here in Showdown. He gained off the tee, then lost on approach. Very average, even to below average stat profile, I would say, just because he lost in 3 of the 4 categories. But as I was kind of hinting at there before, high birdie percentage guy and also a player that's very aggressive, which I like in Showdown lineups. Remember when JT shot 8 over in round 1 and then 9 under in round 2? Hopefully tomorrow he doesn't do the inverse. Dude, he could, Rob. It honestly wouldn't surprise me. He's been very inconsistent, to say the least. Adam Scott didn't do anything spectacular and shot -3, maybe a positive regression candidate. Yeah, let's look at the stats. And I kind of noticed the same. Didn't really stand out at all. They didn't show much on any of the broadcasts. He gained to the 2 ball striking categories and was only just a little bit over the positive with the putter. Yeah, give me some Adam Scott. I'm using him for sure. And I wish he would have done a little bit more damage for main slate, but he's still got 3 more rounds to get after it. Harris deep dive. So yeah, I'm assuming that's Harris English that you want me to go through. Let me know if it's not him. So Harris English lost off the tee, gained a little bit on approach. and then he lost her on the round of the green and then gained a little bit with the putter. This is a complete 5 out of 10 stat profile. There's not much to glean from this, right? It's gaining in 2 categories, losing in the other 2. But I will say about Harris English is that he's got an early tee time. So it's not like the only reason I'm going to go out there and play somebody, but he goes off in the second group off. And if you're trying to find some guys in that 6 and 7K range to go out there and just take a shot on at lower ownership, you're going to get that with Harris, because today shot -1, very nondescript round, right? T38, just kind of a little bit better than the average out there for today. The kind of guy that you could use just because of that tee time. Like that's something you can consider. Billy Horschel is your kryptonite. Yeah, I like Billy Ho. I don't feel like I get him wrong, but everyone's got their different guy. You never play Thigala? So you have a reason for that there. You said you were first in a GPP, and then he triple bogeyed. Yeah, man, that's me with Corey Connors. He's lost me a lot of money. Let's go through Eric Cole here. So good old Eric Cole gained in all 4 categories. I mean, -10, going to have some ownership behind him. Maybe that's the one thing you'd say negative there, is that maybe he played too well and too many people are going to use him out there for tomorrow. And I believe that he has a later tee time. So that might be another thing that he has working against him, is that he's going off at 12:45 local. You don't want to just completely eliminate somebody because of the weather alone, but weather plus chalk on a 6-7K range guy could take me off of them for my exposure. So that would be the counter argument for taking that sort of play. I just like to lay it all out for you, right? You obviously make your own decision there. Billy Ho, you can never get right with most of the time. So, okay, a few guys that seem to have that same kryptonite there. Luke, what has been the issue with Straka? He's been playing like, I'm not going to say that, but can we do a deep dive on Pavon and Fowler too? Yeah, Straka has been not putting up to his standards. I mean, when he was out there winning top 5, top 10, he was putting a lot better than what you've seen here. I mean, today gained ball striking, but lost in the ball 2 short game categories. So that's it out there for Straka. And then you want Pavon and Fowler. So Pavon's ball striking today was solid. I was looking at that because he's a potential play for me out there in my pool. You can see there gained 1.3 strokes there. Fowler, not as favorable out there in those categories. In fact, lost over a stroke over there off the tee, but did at least gain on approach. The other 3 categories into the negative. So I think that word that starts with a K that you used would probably be a good word to use for how Ricky Fowler played today. But yeah, it's not that great out there with the stat profile. He's I think that word fits quite rather nicely there with them. Thigala won you 12K at the Tour Championship with that putt. Yeah, man, he's won me a lot of money as well. So I love Thigala. Just wanted to ask chat though what they were thinking with that. And let's go through some strategy now. So over here on DraftKings, I like to go through some of the contests that are available. And it's down to earth, right? After what we had at the Masters. I mean, we had some great contests available over there for the major. Now it's back to what we're used to. So this big 555, rather than being like a 300, 400K contest, is back to 120K. And it's still top heavy. It's still a 4th over there to first place. Some people like this top heavy GPPs, especially when it's only like 250 entries, like what you have there. So I don't think it's like the worst contest that we've ever seen, but yeah, definitely a little bit smaller than what we've seen over the last week or so. This contest also a lot smaller, still a 3rd to first place, which is usually going to take me away from a lot of those GPPs. You also have this $250 4 max contest, which is also a 4th to first place. So you guys know my thoughts on those super top heavy GPPs. You only play them if you're okay with that sort of payout structure. The ones that you're going to see me playing a little bit more often in would be contests like this that are 15% out there to first. That's the $100 single entry, by the way. This is a little bit of a smaller $100 single entry. Is a little bit more top heavy, but this one has less than 60 entries. So that's one where you're not playing against a whole bunch of people, a lot easier to actually go out there and give a takedown. And then the big $5. So if I'm going to enter the big GPP, which is, as I mentioned, probably 50, 60 lineups I'm entering in this out there for tomorrow. It's a $50 150 max where it's only an 1/8 out there to first place. So as opposed to the 25% like you get for some of these other contests, right? It's 12.5% out there to first, which is much more reasonable and closer to the kind of payout structure that you want out here in contest. And speaking of good payout structures, I'm going to see if they have the $10.18 max posted. And I believe they do, because I saw somebody asking about it a little bit earlier. Let me double check on that though, because if not, that'd be kind of disappointing. And yeah, I don't see it on here. So maybe it already filled out there for tomorrow. But that $10.18 max, that's ones where it's 10% to first. That's a good payout structure. This one here is also 10% to first. So this is the $33 single entry. Then you also have the $12 single entry, which is also one of the better payout structures that you have out there. Those kind of contests are the ones that you want to focus on if you're especially like newer to DFS, or maybe playing it as more of a hobby. A lot of your pros, your higher stakes players, right? That's where they enter, a lot of like 150 maxing the $5, entering the four entry $250, like those sort of things up there towards the top. But like if you're just an everyday player, and let's say you have like a $50 to $100 budget, I'd rather you go out there and put a $100 single entry in out there with just one lineup than 20 lineups over there in the 150 max, because 20 lineups in the 150 max usually isn't going to work out. Like, for example, with me and my 50 to 60 lineups in the 150 max, that is far from my most consistent exposure. In fact, I am willing to lose up to half of my entry fees on that. Like, I don't want to say like most of the time, but like a decent portion of the time, like I know I'm going to lose quite a bit of my entry fees over there in that 150 max exposure. The stuff where I care a little bit more about like min cashing, that sort of thing, going out there and actually grinding out like profit slate to slate. I still grind out profit in the large field GPPs. It's just that there's a lot more variance. I have to be willing to take some downswings with the big upswings you get with some of this top 5, top 10 finishes that pay off your long-term bankroll in those sort of contests. But like when I'm trying to go out there and like profit for every slate, trying to like grind out some single entry min cashes, that sort of thing. Like if I'm not trying to go for a takedown, of course, and those sort of contests are like the $100 single entries, $200 single entries. Maybe I throw an entry over here into this $250 4 max. And I don't always max enter this 4 max. Like sometimes it'll just be a lineup or two I'm going out there and throwing in there and kind of playing it like a single entry sort of affair. So that's my strategy. It doesn't have to be your strategy that you're taking, but I would give you guys a little bit of pushback. Like, especially if you're taking like 4 lineups and you're entering them into this like big 7,000 entry contest, you may think that you're going to win the 50K to first, but the reality is that that's going to be a very difficult thing to do unless you're okay kind of burning that money on fire most of the time. Especially if you're only entering like 4 lineups, like there's a good chance that you might go 0 for 4 out there on cashing, especially if your core isn't up to standards out there on those 4 lineups. Take the $100, right? Those 4 lineups that you would have entered, and just enter this contest. And sure, you only have 1 lineup to go out there and work with, but 4 lineups in a 7,000 entry contest is less equity than a 1 in 222. In fact, you have so much more equity over here in this sort of contest compared to that other one where you're also going against 150 maxers, right? It's not just 4 entries as opposed to the rest of the field. It's 4 entries as opposed to other players that are also 150 maxing against you. Over here in the single entry, you not only have the better payout structure, better chance of actually finishing in the top 5 and winning something for your money, but also no one else can 150 max against you here. This is a single entry contest. The most anyone can go out there and enter for a lineup would be 1 lineup. That is massive out there from the strategy angle. So don't get just beat over the back by sharks because they can go out there 150 max and you can't. Enter in contests that actually make sense for your bankroll. And then the last thing I want to go through here would be our kind of just putting together lineups out here for round 2, which mostly comes down to the leverage, just trying to make sure that we have enough low-owned players in our lineup, especially with the contest that we're entering. And, if this is cash, ownership really doesn't matter at all. Cash is just kind of going out there and jamming in your top plays. In some of your single entry, some of your smaller field GPPs, it's kind of a hybrid between cash and then those large field GPPs where we're really caring about that ownership. But for the sake of this, just to make it a little bit more interesting, we're going to do it for the large field GPPs, right? We're going to build a lineup here, show kind of the extreme when it comes to the ownership. And I guess just kind of keep in mind when you're playing cash that you don't really have to think about this at all. And then in those single entries and those smaller field GPPs, that maybe ownership isn't going to be as big a deal. It's still a deal in those contests. You still have to have leverage to take down any sort of GPP contest, but you don't have to be as stringent on it because you're not playing against 7,000 to 10,000 other entries. So let's build a lineup for this. So we're going to start up top with a Ludwig Aubert, and earliest starter, right? 10-15 start time, but also one of the lower owned guys towards the top. I'm also going to throw in, I was thinking about a Coco, but he does have that later tee time that I don't necessarily love. So let's throw in a Jason Day. So let's kind of lean into the weather edge here. J Day starts at, I think, like 9:10 or something like that, around there. One of the first like 7-8 groups off in the morning. We've got 76.5 remaining for our last 4 spots. Let's throw in another early starter here and maybe even some chalk out there with a Wyndham Clark. So we've got Aubert, Day that are kind of by default going to have ownership because they're towards the top end of the board, but they are quote unquote pivots compared to some of the other guys around them, right? Maybe not in Day's case. Day's probably average to maybe even slightly above average ownership. But with this core of 3 players, right, even with Aubert, that's a pivot towards the top. We've really got to get some leverage with our last 3 spots because remember, this contest that we're entering, even though I know this isn't like the big $5, $25 there, but that's the kind of contest or the kind of lineup that we're building for here. So our last 3 spots are where a lot of that leverage is coming in. So let's find some guys here that maybe didn't have the best round number 1 for a little bit of a bounce back. So it's not even just like the bounce back's what we're looking for. It's also the ownership, the lower ownership out there on those players. So let's go with the Tom Hoge here at $7,500. We know that he's going to be relatively low. Let's also go with Michael Kim there at T51. I know we had a question about whether he was dead before, right? Absolutely not. Right? He could bounce back over the next 3 rounds. These sort of players like a Hoge and Michael Kim, you're getting at sub 10% ownership. And in fact, just to give you guys kind of specifics on those 2 players, yeah, I've got sub 7% ownership on Michael Kim, and I've got sub 8% ownership over there on a Tom Hoge. So, those sort of guys, really easy to get some leverage on, as opposed to a Lucas Glover. I've got a little bit over 10% owned. I've also got guys like a Brian Harmon over 11% owned. JG Spawn also well over 10% owned. Same thing with Akshay Bhatia. So while we could have clicked a lot of those names, and frankly, a lot of those guys are in my player pool over there for tomorrow. So, right, we're needing leverage for this kind of lab, right? That's why we're looking to some of those lower owned kind of players, which is why guys like Lucas Glover would make a whole lot of sense there. So that's kind of the strategy when building lineups, kind of, going out there and weighing in your ownership. You're going to have some higher owned guys. You're going to have some lower owned guys. It's just getting the right balance of it for the kind of contest that you're entering. And, if you were in a single entry, one of those smaller field GPPs, then maybe we can afford to go over here and be like, you know what? I want to take my stand on one of these guys that still has ownership. Like, for example, in Akshay Bhatia, you may say the shots gained approach was just too good today. Nearly 4 shots gained in that category is something that I can't overlook. You can maybe still throw him in a lineup there, even with that core of 3 up top, in a single entry, one of those smaller field contests. So that's the idea out there with the lineup construction. I do want to circle back to any of your last second questions down there in chat. But if you guys don't have anything for me, go ahead, smash that like button for the SHIPIT Nation crew over here. Also subscribe so you guys don't miss any of the content to come, including our round 3 and 4 live streams, which will be over here on the channel for the next few rounds. So of course, guys, the same thing we did here, I'll be doing out there for the last few days of action. So make sure you guys don't miss out on that over the weekend, as well as our prop and betting live streams, which I do over there on my YouTube channel. So of course, guys, you've heard that I have my Patreon page for my own YouTube channel, that sort of thing over here. Just do the SHIPIT Nation Showdown shows over here for this crew on their site. But I also do the prop betting side of things over there on my channel. So just try and keep things separate, right? People that are here for DFS can watch the DFS show. Prop betting, which is like underdog and prize pick stuff. Also matchups, 3 balls, that sort of thing over there on those sites on sportsbooks. That's what I cover over there on that live stream. So for that, check out LukeDFS over here on YouTube. You can also find me over there on Twitter X. I post announcements on when I'm going live for that. Tonight, it's going to be at 9 p.m. Eastern time over there on my YouTube channel. So on there, we go through all the different stat averages that'll be for the RBC and Corrales this week. We also go through pin locations, weather forecast, right, how that'll impact the actual scoring out there at the event. And even if you're not a massive prop bettor, right, first off, maybe you want to dip your toes in the water a little bit over there on that side. It'll teach you a whole lot about the fantasy side as well, going through the deep dives, getting a good idea on conditions, that sort of thing. Like, I know there's people down there in chat that tune in all the time that aren't even really betting a whole lot out there on those kind of sites. It's more so for the extra insight that you get over there at live stream. So make sure to check that out if you guys haven't already. Again, that's GSLukeDFS on Twitter. But let's get to some of these last second comments that we've got. Sahith could never play good tomorrow. Yeah, I don't know about that one, Wayne. It's always the or he could there. Hit the like button, donkeys. You heard the guy. And then Dunlop should do better than he did in round 1. Hey, it was the same thing last week, Ross, right? And I know somebody, LSU Nick, they went out there and played Dunlop after his round 1 last week. And I'm not sure if he was like an optimal play, but he ended up doing decently. I know he made like 5-6 birdies, that sort of thing. So wouldn't blow my mind if you went out there and had that sort of day. So best of luck out there, everyone. I hope to see you guys out there towards the top end of those GPPs. Check out the prop betting stuff if that's your sort of thing later on. Yeah, best of luck, Gang Green. Best of luck, Brian, out there as well. And yeah, a lot of douchebags out there in the AM. I got to say, dude, I knowing that you're Scottish and that's how I read all of your comments is with that kind of accent. That's got to be one of the funniest comments that I've ever seen. Best of luck out there, Brian. Hopefully you take them down in those UK DFS contests. And yeah, LSU Nick definitely has some stones on him. And they take down stuff in Showdown, especially like the big field GPPs. You've got to have some stones on you. So maybe you guys could learn a little thing or two out there from LSU Nick in this process. But that's all I've got for you. Best of luck. I'll see you guys out there for rounds 3 and 4. And with that, let's cut to the outro music.